Only in America.
Only in America.
Only in America.
Only in America.
Only America.
Only in America.
Hi there, I'm Ali Nurani. Welcome to Only in America. All eyes are on 2020 with the election cycle well underway, and immigration is taking center stage.
We would not build walls. We would not put kids in cages. In fact, we would spare no expense to reunite the families that have been separated already. And we would not criminally prosecute any family who is fleeing violence and persecution. We would make sure...
Secretary, let him finish, and I will give you this policy. But let him finish. Let him finish, please.
But DACA, or Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, will be the driving issue of the election.
The Supreme Court just announcing that it will, in fact, hear arguments on the Trump administration's decision to wind down the DACA program. Of course, that's the program that was instituted by President Obama that protects these approximately 700,000 so-called dreamers.
And later, what it all means.
We are only creating outlaws out of law-abiding citizens, and we're doing the same today. Immigrants are violating our laws now because they have no other possible way of making their life and their families' lives better.
From the National Immigration Forum, I'm Ali Nurani. With the start of the Democratic presidential debates, the 2020 election cycle is in full swing. We've been encouraging candidates to get detailed on their immigration policy proposals. And well, after last week's first round of debates, I think we've accomplished that goal. Things became so detailed that, in fact, what came up during the debate is a proposal to do away with a law that criminalizes illegal entry into the United States. Candidate Julian Castro pushed for repealing this law, which is Section 1325 of Title 8 of the U.S. Code. Now, parenthetically, I'm not a lawyer and I just play one on the podcast, but Castro called for rewriting this particular statute.
The reason that they're separating these little children from their families is that they're using Section 1325 of that act, which criminalizes coming across the border, to incarcerate the parents and then separate them. Some of us on this stage have called to end that section, to terminate it. Some, like Congressman O'Rourke, have not. And I want to challenge all of the candidates to do that. I just think it's a mistake, Bethel. I think it's a mistake. And I think that if you truly want to change the system, then we got to repeal that section. If not, then it might as well be the same policy.
Now, the law makes it a misdemeanor for immigrants to enter the U.S. unauthorized. But the question is, what does all this mean and what are the implications? Dara Lind, when she was with Fox, explained that immigration offenses, including illegal entry and reentry, made up a majority of federal criminal prosecutions in fiscal year 2016. At the debate, Democratic candidates discussed whether they think it should even be considered a crime in the first place. Now, looking at the policy, I think we need to prioritize valuable law enforcement resources so, for example, we are keeping our nation secure by focusing on ports of entry. That's where the majority of guns, drugs, and money are smuggled. Those are the real public safety threats we need to be thinking about when it comes to border security. But detailed proposals aside, the immigration issue that will drive the election may very well be the DACA program. Now remember, President Trump rescinded the program way back in the fall of 2017. Since then, lower courts across the country have been busy with a wide range of lawsuits from proponents and opponents of the program. Jessica Schneider of CNN reports.
So finally, the Trump administration will in fact be getting its day in court, something that they've been pushing for. We've been waiting for a decision like this to determine if the Supreme Court would take it for weeks. And what's interesting about this is the timing here. The Supreme Court, of course, ended their term yesterday, Poppy, but they will be back at it in October for their next term. That is when they will hear this DACA case. That means the arguments will be at the height of the election and the campaign season, and then the decision will come out likely just months before the election itself.
All to say, if you thought our nation's immigration debate was a wild and woolly ride, wait for the roller coaster in the months ahead.
Support for the National Immigration Forum comes from the James Irvine Foundation, expanding opportunity for the people of California, and from the Carnegie Corporation of New York, established in 1911 by Andrew Carnegie to promote the advancement and diffusion of knowledge and understanding.
Speaking of our immigration laws, my guest this week and I talk about different aspects of our immigration system and how they might be changed. Steve Kuhn spent his career at some of the top financial firms and worked as a hedge fund manager. After retiring, he's dedicated his efforts toward immigration and philanthropy. In this work, Steve founded Ideal Immigration, an organization that advocates for the economic and social benefits of immigration to the United States. Ideal believes that by optimizing U.S. immigration, we allow for more people to live up to their fullest potential, contributing to a global economy while improving their own quality of life. Thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate this.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So before we start talking immigration policy, tell me a little about yourself.
I was born in Minnesota, blue-collar family. Neither of my parents went to university, but were amazing parents, and a house filled with games and strategy games and math. And
what did your parents do?
My father was a carpenter. He was a machinist. My mother was at one point a teacher, but at the point I was born was a housewife. Was happy and successful enough to earn a spot at Harvard, where I studied economics and actually focused on game theory. And took that and said, what could I do in life that's most like playing a game that I could get paid for? And that led me to a career on Wall Street. Was there for about 20 years, worked at a number of different firms, and at one point was a partner in a $15 billion hedge fund called Pine River Capital. And
what was it like growing up in Minnesota? Where in Minnesota?
Just outside of Minneapolis.
Yeah.
It was great. Very, they call it Minnesota nice. It was a very wonderful upbringing. My older brother's amazing. He's one of the most kind and amazing people I know. So it was great.
And then when you kind of moved to Boston, what was that transition like? I'm always kind of fascinated by the, people who grew up in the middle of the country, but then end up on the coast.
Well, it was interesting. I think that I had 5 roommates. So we had a freshman group of 6 kind of in our pod. All 5 of my roommates came from relatively wealthy families. All of them went to private schools, some of which were some of the most exclusive private schools in the country. I went to a public high school, lower middle class family. So I definitely had like a little period of adjustment. I realized that I wasn't, as they say, I wasn't in Kansas anymore. I wasn't in Minnesota anymore. But that happens. That happens quick. That's why you go to school, and that's why you go away. And I had an amazing experience at Harvard. I loved every part of it.
So then what made you decide to go into finance? This is your opportunity to talk about game theory here.
Well, it's something that I enjoy, obviously. I took a class my freshman year with Professor Thomas Schelling, who won the Nobel for his work on game theory. He's probably most famous for applying game theory to the Cold War. He was an advisor to Senator Kennedy during the Cuban Missile Crisis. I talk about playing for high stakes. That's probably the highest stakes poker game in human history. And I took a class with Professor Schelling my freshman year called Games and Decisions, and I loved it and was hooked ever since.
So then let's jump ahead a little bit to immigration, because a few months ago I interviewed Monica Castillo, who is a film critic, and asked her what immigrant stories we're not telling. And she immediately went to the story of, why somebody decides to leave, why somebody decides to migrate. So I wanted to kind of ask you this question about, put yourself in the shoes of an immigrant leaving Honduras today, but apply game theory to it. What are they weighing there?
Well, I think in many cases, the available options in staying are just not acceptable. Whether you have a 16-year-old son who's being recruited by the drug gangs, join or die, that's not a very acceptable choice. Or maybe you have a 14-year-old daughter who, again, is being recruited by the drug gangs for various reasons, let's say. And you have to make a decision about whether you're going to accept that reality or whether you're going to risk either you and your children migrating to some place where that's no longer the reality, or just sending your children alone. And it's very difficult to place oneself in that choice. But I think we'd be all wise to think about how often that is the practical reality that faces many people in those countries. You look at the murder rate in Guatemala, I think it's 10 times the murder rate of our most dangerous city in America. And people just don't understand how completely frightening that must be as a parent of a child who's entering the age where those choices are going to be forced upon them. I think that's something that we should all have more empathy for.
But it's right. It's those choices. Every day we're all faced with choices, but very, very few of us, fortunately, are faced with a choice as dire as that.
Yeah, that's right. And I love the musical Les Miserables.
Uh-huh.
Jean Valjean, he steals a loaf of bread and gets put in prison for 10 years. And Inspector Javert is the law and order. You got to have law and order. And there's limits to the power of the law and order argument. When the situation that one is faced with is that dire, I don't think that even coldly rational decisions about what's fair as a punishment to a person facing that situation who then breaks a law are as easy as some people think they are. I just don't see it that way.
Yeah, to immigrate is a very, very natural decision. And our laws are set up in so many ways around immigration to hinder that natural decision.
I think that's right. One thing that we often discuss when we, as part of the IDEAL team, is if you are concerned about law and order and about having laws that are enforced, you have to have laws that people actually believe in.
Right. So a year ago, you started IDEAL. Give me a sense of why you started IDEAL as an organization.
So I left the world of Wall Street about 6 years ago with the goal of trying to make the world a better place. David Brooks called it the second mountain. If you had success in climbing the mountain of career success, that's no longer as appealing, and you want to climb a second mountain. And I certainly wanted to do that. And I've been a contributor and sometimes a board member to a number of different philanthropic organizations doing work both in the United States, some in where I now reside mainly in Austin, Texas, but some also doing work around the world. And I was doing all that work and thinking about ways to be as effective and altruist as possible, and started thinking about how even a very small change or even a small chance of change in our immigration policy would do amazing things for untold millions, maybe even untold billions of people on the planet. And it doesn't take one does not have to have a very large chance of success when you're dealing with those kind of impacts and those kind of numbers to think that it might be the most effective thing one could do with one's time and one's money if you want to make the world a better place and make the U.S. a better place.
So then give me a sense of why you got into IDEAL. Even before we get into the policy proposals and the conversations you all have been having, but was there a moment when the picture you just painted became really, really clear? Was there a conversation that you had? Was there a person that you met?
I would say it's a combination of forces. One force was a TED Talk video from a professor at George Mason University named Alex Tabarrok. And he argued that the rate of legal immigration to the wealthy country of the world, including the United States, was too low, and that even a very small increase in that rate of legal immigration would do more to end global poverty than all the aid programs and all the charitable efforts in the world combined. And I care about that. I care about world poverty and care about policies that would fix that. Ironically, I don't actually speak about that motivation that often when I try to talk to policymakers in D.C.
Why not?
I don't think that most policymakers in D.C., at least openly, would ever, this is going to sound strange, but they would never openly say that they care about world poverty. I think that would be a political loser for them, and they won't ever say that. So when we do talk about the advantages of IDEAL, we talk about the advantages to Americans, to the American economy. Maybe we talk about the advantages to the people who are here, those pursuing legal status or those who are undocumented. Maybe we go that far, but talking about the impact on making the world better is not something we generally talk about, because I don't think that's persuasive in the U.S. political culture.
So, okay, there's TED Talk. I'm sorry, I took a little off.
Alex Tabarrok, he was very influenced on that. And then Professor Peter Singer at Princeton, who's at least the former head of the Princeton philosophy program. I'm not sure if he still is. He wrote a book called The Life You Can Save. And he has the metaphor of the drowning child. You're walking in a city square and there's a fountain that's 3 or 4 feet deep. And there's a child in there who's struggling and screaming out for help so he doesn't drown. And you're dressed in your nicest suit and you're going to be late for work. And you look around, you see there's nobody else to save the child. What do? And everyone says, well, of course I wade in and save the child, even if there's some cost to myself. And he talks about if that cost turned out to be $3,000, everyone says they would do that. But yet I can list 10 charities in the world where if you send $3,000, I can almost certainly prove to you you're going to save at least one life. And he challenges you to really think about whether you really were saving the drowning child or not. I think he takes it even further and says, what if now instead of you walking in that town square, it's a friend of yours and they're caught on closed caption television and they're walking by the square, you see the child screaming, you see them look at the child and then they walk by and they don't save the child. Would you think less of that person? I think most people will say, well, of course I would. How could anybody do that? And Professor Singer then argues that if you're a person of means living in this country, in a first world country, and you're not doing something to attack the issues of global poverty, you're that person. You're the person who's walking by the fountain and not saving the child. And that was impactful to me.
So from the perspective of ideal immigration, what's the ideal immigration policy? I'm sure that's the first time you've gotten that very, very witty question.
Here's how we generally frame it, is that one of the best ways, or probably the best way, to reduce illegal immigration is to create more legal paths for people to come here. And we're not against border security. IDEAL supports border security. We're not against enforcing immigration laws. We should have laws that we enforce, but in order to do that, we should have laws that are more aligned with our interests and with our values. Every time that we find the so-called nanny with the broken taillight who has a family that's employing her, that loves her, and we deport that person, instead of focusing on, say, the drug dealer or the gang member, every time that we do that, we're creating a policy that people just don't like. That's why we have sanctuary cities, because we're often deporting people that are loved. The case of Roberto Beristain is an example. He was a person in Granger, Indiana. He started off as a dishwasher, was in the country for 20 years, saved money, ended up buying a restaurant, employing 20 people, U.S. citizen wife, and 3 U.S. citizen kids. He had been reporting to the INS every year because his legal status was murky. They had never taken action on him until 2017. That day he reported to INS thinking it was just going to be any other day, and he was deported. And now his family has moved to Mexico to be with him. So I look at that example, and then people wonder why there's sanctuary cities, or why there's not broad support for enforcing the immigration laws as they're written. And what I say to people is, not every person who's violated the immigration laws is they're not all in the same situation. There's the equivalent of jaywalking, and there's the equivalent of assault. You don't treat those two offenses the same. Both of them are violations of law, but we don't treat them the same. And we need to have a policy that's a little bit more nuanced. So our policy is this: if you have a job with a U.S. employer and that employer is willing to pay $2,500 a year extra for you and hire you under all U.S. labor laws, minimum wage laws, overtime hours, OSHA, et cetera, then you can have what we call a workforce visa, a 1-year visa to stay in the country and have legal status. That could be renewable every year if you continue to work, pay taxes, obey the laws, et cetera. Very simple. Some of the talking points related to that is no employer has an incentive to hire an immigrant over a U.S. citizen because they have to hire them under all labor laws and they have to pay something extra. They would only do that in situations where they cannot find someone to do that work otherwise. And I think that's an important part of what our message is. And that would allow people to find legal ways to come here. They wouldn't have to do all I think that day, the money that the cartels and the coyotes are making, that basically goes away. And that money instead goes to the U.S. Treasury. So we defund the cartels and fund efforts to make our countries stronger and better.
The question here kind of goes beyond the policy and even beyond the politics, because I think, a lot of our challenge is helping the public understand what the benefit is of immigration to their bottom line, which you were saying earlier, right?
Yeah.
So how would you explain this policy to, the family who lives in suburban Minneapolis now, who's really struggling with this question of, do we need more immigrants in the U.S.?
Sure. I would say, first of all, that we have people coming to the U.S. The question is whether we're going to allow that system to be done legally or illegally. That's one question. I think there's tremendous advantages to having a legal system where we have more control and an understanding of who is actually here in the country, and we have better understanding of that. So I'd say, first of all, that prohibition didn't work with alcohol. We tried that, and then we realized that we were only creating outlaws out of law-abiding citizens, and we're doing the same today. Immigrants are violating our laws now because they have no other possible way of making their life and their families' lives better. And we have employers who are employing people who are undocumented, and we're creating outlaws in many of our industries. If you look at the restaurant industry, the agricultural industry, the construction industry, the estimates of the percentage of the workforce that is undocumented are very, very high, and people in those industries know that. Mm-hmm. We are taking people who are otherwise law-abiding and turning them into outlaws through our policies. That's not a positive thing. The other thing I would say to that person in Minnesota or wherever they would be is the idea that immigrants steal jobs or take jobs the evidence is quite strong the other way. And I'll give a couple arguments, and then I'll make a historical example of why that argument is not true. First of all, people that come here not only take a job, but they're also consumers. They need a place to live. They need food. That's obviously true. So they might be taking a job, but they're also creating a job through their demands. The other thing is what I talk about is immigrants that come here. Are they substitutes for American workers, or what we call in economics complements? So the example I like to talk is, say you want to open a restaurant in Austin, Texas, and you can't open that restaurant unless you can hire 10 employees to staff it. If you can only find 8, you don't open the restaurant. If the last 2 people can now come here legally with a workforce visa, those 2 people didn't take 2 jobs, they created 8 jobs. And I think, frankly, that is the practical reality in a lot of places in the country with unemployment rates that are as low as they are. And I think that's the evidence.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah. And I think that is actually the way it is. I know a lot of people who have businesses that would love to expand them, but they just simply can't do that. If they could expand it and have the workforce to do it, they would hire more marketing people. They would hire, the whole business would expand, and that would create more wealth, more taxes, more wealth for the U.S. citizens.
So are you optimistic about the future? I mean, you've got this massive second mountain in front of you.
I am.
Yeah. Why?
Frankly, I think ultimately the forces of pro-immigration will win. And I think it matters a lot how quickly it happens. But I think forces of pro-immigration will win. And I will try to prove it to you. I think Japan would be, in many ways, if you had to pick a country that is least well set up for immigration, it might be Japan.
Right.
Very few people outside of Japan speak Japanese. It is a fairly, a society that's not really open to other cultures so much. I don't mean to be insulting to anybody, but
that's true. Yeah.
Hopefully in a non-insulting way, I'm being clear. And yet, Japan is increasing legal immigration because of the demographic challenge they face.
Right.
They have a tremendous number of people retiring. They need to have people that can take care of the retirees and basically face a choice. They can export their seniors, or they could bring in immigrant labor. And Japan is doing that. A country, again, that doesn't have our history of immigration, our ability to assimilate, the fact that English is a language that often is spoken all over the world. They have every disadvantage, and yet Japan is going down that path.
Yeah.
Our demographic challenge is a little bit less daunting than Japan's and a little bit later than Japan's, but it's coming.
Yeah.
We have 10,000 baby boomers retiring every day, 3.5 million a year. Our rates of dementia and Alzheimer's are high, and that requires a lot of care. And the biggest job category growth in America is home health care. And frankly, we just don't have a pool of extra labor to take care of the demands for this. And that's not something that robots are going to take the job. That's just not a thing. My father's in an assisted living facility now in Minnesota. Over half the people that take care of him are first-generation immigrants. And they do an amazing job. He lives at a great facility with people that are very caring and do tough, challenging, not the most glamorous work. And I'm thankful for them every day. And if they weren't here, I think, and that's now. Look at the numbers 5 years from now, 10 years from now.
So my last question for you. There's a lot of anticipation about this. The name of the podcast is Only in America. So the question is, just to finish this sentence, only in America, ...
Only in America do people who come here as immigrants become Americans. And I'm totally stealing a line from President Reagan, his last speech as president, when he spoke about the ability for people to come to America and become American is uniquely different than any other country. And I think that's true. I think it's still true. You hear some anti-immigrant voices saying that people are not assimilating as well as they used to. At least I think that's hogwash. I don't think there's any reality to that. I think the United States, our true superpower is the fact that people with ambition, people who want to work hard, people who are talented, want to come here. And if we throw away that superpower, we're in trouble. We won't do well.
Thank you very, very much. I really, really appreciate the time. And thank you very much for launching Ideal and all the amazing work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Steve Kuhn is the founder of Ideal Immigration. You can find more information about Steve on our website, immigrationforum.org. And while you're there, please take a minute, subscribe to Only in America, and share it with a friend. That's all for this week. Only in America is produced and edited by Emily Chow, Joanna Taylor, and Megan Wetmore. Kathleen Farrell is the executive producer, and I'm Ali Nirani. Thank you so much for listening to Only in America, and I will talk to you next week.